How is everybody doing? And welcome back for another Strength Chat episode. Today, I'm joined by a very special guest. Today, I am joined by strength and conditioning coach, the one and only Joel Harries. How are you doing?
Mate, I'm all the better for listening to that intro, man.
Yeah, I always say, I was like, you can just have that recorded, just have that as like for text messages. Well, no one texts anymore; it's all WhatsApp, isn't it? But just have that as as an audio coming up from there. Yeah, thanks a lot for taking the time to jump on. I suppose the first question is, how are you? What's been happening in your world recently?
Mate, firstly, thanks for having me on. It's always nice to come and chat, give the missus a break from my dribble, is what I like to say whenever I come on. Need someone's willing to listen. But mate, I'm all good, my end. Obviously the time difference that we spoke about off the call. Mate, had a good training session this morning, filled up ready, and mate, the week going smooth so far. Mate, how's things with you?
Yeah, all good. I know, like back into the swing of things now. So, yeah, been in Thailand since July last year. Been working at Titan Fitness since October. So it's just really interesting. Obviously, my background in kind of rugby and powerlifting and strongman and that sort of stuff. You come over here, and it's not really. A thing really. Like Mai Tai is really big. Like High Rocks, there's something new that we've been doing called like Primal. So in terms of getting yourself, ready for sport, it's quite interesting seeing different ways of doing things, people from different countries, their thoughts on stuff. So yeah, it's been a good adjustment, and I'm slowly getting used to the heat, which is good. But I did quite a brief introduction there. I only gave a statement. But for everyone listening who might not know your background in training, coaching, competing, just want to give a little bit of a background to yourself, Joe.
Yeah, that's no worries. And for those that don't know about Joel, I run the Strength Solution. So I've been coaching 7 years and I've been an athlete for a lot longer than that. 12 years in the sport of rugby, retired 3 years ago. And throughout my career competing in rugby and now branching into trying to find other forms of physical activity to punish myself with. I've done powerlifting competitions, I've done weightlifting competitions, dabbled a bit in CrossFit, done the dreaded high rocks now. So I'm picking up all the recreational athlete starter pack is being ticked off with these things. But yeah, I've always been fascinated with barbell sports from the moment that I got into training. I was always growing up the overweight, weak, undersized kid from a muscular development standpoint. I didn't really have an early introduction to sports, and I think I picked up rugby at the age of 11. So that was my first dip of the toe in it. I always wanted to be a footballer, had two left feet and an eating problem, so naturally gravitated towards playing front row in rugby. And I thought one of the things that I always wanted to do was follow my grandfather's footsteps. So he's a big idol of mine. He was someone that I looked up to, and he had the genetics that I didn't have. He was 6'3", second row, played at the local rugby club, which at the time was such a prestigious honour. They played against the All Blacks, played against South Africa, and he was dubbed the best player to never get a Welsh cap. So I wanted to follow in his footsteps and realised that training was such a massive part in that. And like many people that are now coaching, got fascinated with it. I loved training, competing, pushing myself, and seeing progress on a week to week basis, but most importantly, seeing that progress onto the pitch. And through the 12 years of my career, found myself trying every single different method to get the most progress. And I've almost been the guinea pig over this time. And I was lucky enough to get invited into training camps with academies, with the international setup, and you start to get exposed to how the professionals do it. And honestly, went to uni not long after my first exposure with international rugby, and I was like, you know what, this is my profession. So I spent past 7 years, I'd say, studying, learning, got my undergrad, and started working in personal training to start off with, branch more towards that strength coaching side of things. And now we run the strength solution, which helps rugby players who potentially feel like they don't have the best hand that's been dealt to them from a genetic standpoint. They know they're a great player, but They just know that they've got another level in them, but they don't know how to do it. And my job is to help bridge that gap through the lessons that I've had and the lessons I've learned along the way.
Ah, cool. I like that kind of learning from what the lessons that you've had and kind of like passing that on. Because a lot of people talk about experience, and I think you only get experience from making mistakes or trying different things, and trying to help other people not make those mistakes, and trying to put a lot more content and information out there. And especially when you've said there about going to uni, finding out that coaching was where you wanted to go. I think maybe from a coach's standpoint, or a lot of younger coaches listening, sometimes there's a thought that they play the sport and it's like, I know I'm gonna be assigned to a team, I'm gonna be able to do this, and before long I'll be coaching the England team or Welsh team, and I'll be in there. What was that something that you thought about to try and work with a team? Have you had that experience from being in that team environment, or was it kind of a natural progression to work with those individuals that were coming to you and being like, look, I'm struggling with this. I want to get to this point, if that makes sense.
No, I think it's a great question. And when you go to university, I think the online coaching, personal training world wasn't as prominent as it is now. So when I was in uni, the one goal coming out the end of that was I want to work with the best of the best. I know the science, I know everything about it. I love the team environment. I want to go work my way up through the ranks and become Wales's strength and conditioning coach, move on, British and Irish Lions strength and conditioning coach. But there are so many people that are fighting for that job. And alongside that, you have to put bread on the table somehow. So I stepped into personal training, working in the gym, and I quickly realized that the people at the top of the game are there not because of their training, in spite of it. These people are genetic outliers. They're the best of the best for a reason. And it's not purely genetics. They all work hard, they all train hard. But when you're at that level, skill and the ability to just respond to training is very much the determining factor. And then the contrast of that is working in a recreational gym where people take the sport of rugby as a hobby as opposed to a job. You realize the massive gap in what's being taught and delivered and presented as sound training advice to people at the amateur level. And you realize, wow, there is such a huge gap for these players to fine tune their development and play their best rugby. And this is the population that the training works the most on. These are the ones that haven't been exposed to the strength, speed, power from the age of 12, 13, 14. They're the people where I was trying to figure it out on the fly and trying to make it work. And when you put the right training in these people's hands, the amount of progress that they can make is so satisfying to watch. And they can make that progress in such a short space of time. And the effect that that has on their playing performance really lit me up because I was having messages being like, oh my God, I didn't think I'd be able to do this. I didn't think I'd be able to do this. And while I thought some of those was the normal things, like people just did, you quickly realize that no, you're unlocking a level of performance that these people always wanted to get to, but never really thought that they could, or it was just a pipe dream. And when you make that a reality, the satisfaction that I had from that was night and day difference to the thought of working in the team environment at the highest level. And I think maybe it's survivorship bias on my end coming from and making that work. But that's the thing that gets me out of bed excited to do the job that I do every day.
Yeah, yeah, I've got a lot of time for that because I think, especially when you're talking at the very top level, it's small changes. It's not anything kind of like groundbreaking. They've probably been there, done it before. If they've been for a professional or at that level for a long time. Whereas, seeing players go from, even if it's something going from like the second team to the first team or going to a team higher up in the league, the changes that you can see and probably the impact that it's going to have is going to be a lot more. kind of diving a little bit more into, seeing that impact on there, and you kind of touched on it a little bit, where players will see all this content, all this information, the programs that they should be following, the procedures that they should be following, and a lot of that is going to be based off, I've seen it, clips with national teams, the I'll actually just save I've not watched it yet. The Lions Uncut from the last year's British Lions. You see him in the gym, and it's like, all right, so that's what I need to be doing. And I suppose the first question is, when we're looking at these maybe stumbling blocks that people fall into, and that, I don't think for 1 minute it's ever a lack of effort. I think it's maybe just how do you apply that, and do you think, because there's so much information out there, that they're kind of just cherry picking things, and it's maybe a little bit overwhelming, as opposed to, applying that to, do we need to add that into pre-season? What does during season? Do we have to take a dedicated amount of time to focus on this thing? Do you think for a lot of players it's just overwhelming, and they just try and do everything and just be like, well, if I give it all a go, surely something's going to work?
Yeah, I think there's a heavy, heavy reliance on the approach of throw as much shit as the wall and see what sticks. And I think that's the social media narrative nowadays, where I'm guilty of it, you're probably guilty of it. All coaches want to try and garner attention. And the best way to garner attention is to put a polarizing statement, the one thing you're missing. This is the exercise you need to be doing. And getting a green screen of Ellis Genge squatting, weight, pointing, going like, the way that I look at social media is, if you was to move into a house and you want to decorate this house, taking workouts off social media is the equivalent of, right, this room I'm going to paint pink, this room I'm going to paint green, this room I'm going to throw this on the wall. We'll have this. And when you walk in, one room may look very, very well presented, but it doesn't really link in to all the other rooms. There's no congruent feel to it. There's no, oh wow, this is the emphasis. This is the style. It's just, oh, this is just random. And I think that's the mistake that so many amateur players make, because if you see the pros doing it, well, I should be doing it. And there's two issues with that. Number one, the pros are at that elite standard. They're doing everything right, and they've done it right consistently for a period of time that has allowed them to start to really, really fine tune and eke those 1% out of a program, that mean the things that they're doing are right for them, but not might be right for you. And then the other issue is, okay, well, if they are right for you, how does that fit in the bigger picture? And I feel like so many people miss that. They focus on the speed, they focus on the strength, they focus on the power, they focus on the conditioning, but not how those match together across a program. And it's almost like pick and mix. I'll have a bit of this, bit of this, bit of that. But then there's no real outcome. There's no real goal. And I think that then, like you said, it's never a lack of effort. Rugby players specifically, and athletes in general, they have no doubt, if you tell them to run through a brick wall, do that 4, 5, 6 times a week, fine. Mental toughness, yeah, I'm all about it. But activity is an accomplishment. And that's kind of the reality is, you can do as much of this stuff, but until you get it structured in a way that's right for the person, then you're always just going to be a busy person as opposed to a productive person.
Yeah, I think that's I like that quote there. Yeah, busy person rather than productive, because I actually I used to work as a tree surgeon for a little bit, and yeah, a guy who used to work with called Brian was like, you can look busy but not get actually anything done. That whole kind of thing of, spinning your wheels. Going back to, the athletes that you work with, then, from having that starting point, because you said yourself there, from your own experience going to the gym, trying all these things out, I'm sure players listening will be like, yeah, I do go to the gym, yeah, I do all these things. So a player comes to you, what's the starting point with that? Because if they've got all these ideas of, well, I do this and I do this on this day and I train on this day and I've got games and I'm doing this, there's a lot of noise. There's a lot of noise there, like what you've said, a lot of business. So as a starting point, how do you kind of approach that to be like, look, we're gonna start adding in this structure, we're gonna start having this direction, and I suppose getting buy-in to maybe just a different way of thinking, because I know, it's the same probably with coaches. Sometimes they have that mentality of, right, no, we need to do it this way, or I've been doing it this way for X amount of time. Whereas the uncomfortable side of it is like, but how, like what you've said, how much productivity have you done? How much progress have you done? Or are you doing the same thing and you're still in the same position that you were 2 or 3 seasons ago? Does that kind of make sense?
No, makes complete sense. I think, as you were saying, and the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And that's the position that so many players find themselves in. Because something worked before, it'll work again. And as we know as coaches, what got you from A to B isn't going to be the thing that gets you from B to C. So whenever we get a player come to us, it's firstly about understanding that a successful program comes down to three things, especially in the sport of rugby. I believe it comes down to the sport, first and foremost. Rugby is an 8-minute game with high collisions that require roughly 5 to 8K of running, depending on the level that you play at, with high speed meters. So we know that there's specific demands to that sport. But then it breaks down even further. So we look at the position, and there's going to be certain position groups that require a little bit more. Front row forwards, or max strength. Fullbacks, we need a bit more speed. Scrum halves, a bit more conditioning. So we know then that not only can we bucket an athlete based on the sport, we can bucket the athlete based on the position that they play. And then the final thing is we can bucket the athlete based on their personal profile. And this is usually the start point for us. We ask the athlete, what is going on in your rugby and where are you falling short? And we start to have this subjective conversation because sometimes they care about the numbers. They have objective goals in the gym. They want to hit specific targets. Other times is, well, I want to be better on the pitch. So we'll always start there. Okay, what is going on the pitch right now? And then we'll just have a conversation. We'll start to listen. Are they gassing out after 20 minutes? Can they have a good couple of scrums? But then 2 or 3 reset scrums later, they're going to push back off the ball. And we start to look at the sport where things are falling short and ultimately some of the physical qualities that they start to lack there. And then we'll run them through an objective testing battery. So if you go to any pro team, you'll have a medical, you'll have some strength, some power, some speed, some conditioning testing, and we will run exactly the same day. So not only can we have the subjective, we can say, look, Stephen, your Broncos, 7 minutes. Right now for your position, the reason why you're gassing out is most of the people at the high standard are doing it in 5:30. But really good news, you're squatting just a little bit more than those people. So we have an identified limiting factor. And then we will start by addressing that first. So that's kind of the whole process of how we'd start a program and identifying, okay, what is actually the thing that's holding this person back? Because the biggest thing that I hear from players is I want to get stronger, I want to get fitter, I want to get faster, I want to get more conditioned, and I want to play better rugby. And I'm like, wow, don't we all? Like, if we had to say goals, we'd all want to do that. But you try and do everything, you'll get nothing. It's about trying to set that clear emphasis as a start point and a goal that not only gets them motivated, but they can see the logic behind as well. And that's where comparing the data against other players in your position, other standards of rugby, so they can see, right, okay, yes, this is definitely the factor that I need to work on. And that's kind of always the first point.
Yeah, I think with that there, I think often people often overlook that, because you've said there, look, you're doing it in 7 minutes. We need to do it in 5 minutes 30 or whatever it is from there. That's kind of actual data you can compare it to. It's a little bit like there's you can look at like rowing times and that sort of stuff. I've looked before. I think there was even some times off. I think it was like it was done on like the Brisbane Broncos or in like the NRL of like what academy players should be at. So there is information out there, and what I liked about that is that you've mentioned it to actual data and like, look, this is what they're doing, as opposed to seeing, you mentioned there about Ellis Genge squatting, and it's like, right, he's squatting 200 kilos or whatever, but that's just like one post. You're just comparing it to one snippet as opposed to, look, this is where you can rank yourself and see improvement, as opposed to, oh well, I've seen this clip of Ellis Genge. How am I going to get to there? When you're doing those tests and seeing where things are at, how do you kind of approach? Because players will often say, I'm going to the gym and I'm following this program, and it's just a case of, I'm just going to get stronger and stronger and stronger, and I'm just going to throw some box jumps in there, and I want to do some sprints. That's my power. That's my power and my speed. And then the other side of it might be a case of, well, I train twice a week and I play on a Saturday. So that's my cardio thing. So, I don't understand why I'm not getting fitter. How am I supposed to get a faster a Bronco test? How do you kind of give them direction to say, look, this is what we're going to do, and start kind of bulking out that program a little bit? Because if they're already doing it, you've had those batteries of tests, and it's like, oh well, I just need to do more of this just same running that I've always been doing, rather than maybe saying, all right, well, this is how your week is going to look now to get from A to B.
And I think the one thing is it helps when you have results that you can walk through. So a lot of the time people will sign up to the program because they've seen a specific result from someone. It could be a body comp journey, it could be this. And I think having that almost proof that you can relate back to that person and say, look, okay, you could do more of what you're doing. That may work, but this is what happens when you follow the structure that we're trying to outline. And I think it's always trying to relate back to our job is to get you there in the fastest way possible, with as little injuries as possible, in the funnest way possible. And that's kind of the motto of S&C coaching, I believe. It's like, that's that buy-in. So if you can then start to show people, right, this is what he's done, this is what they've done, this is how they've done it. And I think having that there is the start point. And then I think the second thing is starting to just pick holes in their approach, because there's not one way to do anything. We'll agree on stuff, we'll disagree on a lot of stuff, but we all have our own individual methods. And I think the reason why they're looking for help is their current approach isn't working. So it's like highlighting that and just being like, look, you hired a professional, let the professional do their job. And then I think it's that education along the way of, for example, we know that if they want to emphasize conditioning, they're going to be hitting maybe 3, 4 conditioning sessions a week, looking at specific energy systems, understanding how to elicit the adaptation in those energy systems, understand how that relates to on-pitch performance, and then starting to say, right, well, this is how we build it out. Can we fit it in this way? And it's always like a athlete-led process where we're just having these discussions. It's always like a mentorship, not a dictatorship. And the more that they can understand behind it, when we actually put that program over, it's very much something that they can then say, you know what? Okay, I understand it. I see the reasoning, the science behind it. It's a proven method with results. I'm just going to buy into it. And I think that's the first kind of part of change. I don't know if that answered your question or whether that was off
Yeah,
tangent.
no, I think with that, the whole thing of being, it's a team effort, rather than just saying, just do this. And the other thing of, not picking holes in what people are doing, because I think with that, nobody likes to be told that they're doing something wrong, and it's a little bit like, oh, bloody hell, I've been trying to do this, and there kind of is that mindset of, oh well, it's all a waste of time. They've got to start from scratch, and then all of a sudden their goal feels, too far away with that. I suppose how we're doing, and you've said there about, we're going to use different energy systems. We're going to use, results that we've used before. Using a little bit of science behind that as well. And I think sometimes, especially depending on the level of it rugby, sometimes there's still that kind of old school approach of, like what you said earlier about just run through the brick wall. That'll help with your mental toughness, get you fitter, all those sorts of things. For most amateurs, even like semi-pro, they've still got to balance um, life, working, kids, family, socials, all that sort of stuff. And we've mentioned a lot there about comparing it to, and rightly so, it's the same in powerlifting, same in higher rocks, CrossFit. You're always going to compare to people who are at the very top, but they have, and I think you touched on this as well, they have everything in place that allows them to perform at that level. How do you kind of incorporate or take that program into account when it's a case of, they're working 9 till 5, they're doing everything like that, and then they try and get there? Because one thing that I feel like a lot of people do is thinking more is always better. I need to do more of this. I need to do more of that, which, to a certain extent is true. If you want to get better, you need to do that work. But how do you strike that balance so that they still get that performance on the pitch without kind of having burnout in all of the other areas that they need to manage?
And I think that comes back down to the initial conversation and that testing as well. Because if you try and do too much of everything, like at the pro game, I did a YouTube video breaking down Max Heath and the Bristol Bears and kind of what they did across the course of the week. They had 2 speed sessions designated as primers 30 minutes before their training session. They then had skill sessions maybe 3, 4, 5 times a week. They had unit sessions, and they have so much time that is bought back because it is their job. And when the time is bought back, the food is prepped for you, and everything from a foundational recovery perspective is ticked off because you're paid to do it. It becomes so much easier to start to balance multiple goals. You may be able to get into a deficit while getting a little bit stronger or while working on your conditioning. But if you're someone that's strapped for time, you maybe train Monday, Wednesday, Friday in the gym. You've got training Tuesday, Thursday, games on a Saturday. You've got 4.5 hours of designated physical S&C that you can get in. And if you try and juggle strength, speed, power, and conditioning throughout that period of time, that is when you end up busy, because there is a certain amount of time that is needed to dedicate to a physical quality. So if you look at aerobic marathon runners, the amount of running training that they do through the week is astronomical. They probably train more hours than you work because that is needed for that quality. But they don't then try and set powerlifting numbers at the end of it. And then they don't try and set Olympic weightlifting jump PBs, and they don't try and smash a 40-meter sprint time. They keep the goal. And I think that's where having that clear distinction of this is where you're strong and this is where you're weak. This is how we portion and allocate the time that you have across the course of the week to making actual progress in that goal versus making zero progress across every goal, but touching everything equally. And I think that's the first step to actually buying back more time, because most people overestimate how much they need to do to maintain a quality, but they underestimate how much they need to do to progress it. And if you can start to outline the fact that one strength session every 14 days for a strong person is probably enough to maintain that quality over the course of the season. So that means that you've got 13 opportunities to juggle all the other stuff. And when you start to have those conversations, they start to have these light bulb moments of, yeah, I am trying to do everything at once. And I think that's the issue with juggling that. And then the second thing is, we know that you can only recover, or you can only adapt to what you can recover from. And if these individuals then saying, I want to do more, but they eat like a child, they have zero accountability around nutrition, their calories are up and down, they don't know how to fuel properly for sessions, they don't have the right macronutrient profile to like recover and adapt, but most importantly, energize these sessions. And then they sleep at maybe sporadic times throughout the course of the week. They don't have a consistent bedtime routine. They wake up whenever they feel like it. They miss sessions in the morning. We address those lifestyle factors as well, because then when they're doing those 4.5 hours of training to a high standard with a specific goal, they're recovering better, they're sleeping better, they're eating better. Then it's like, okay, maybe we can do a little bit more. We can maybe adapt to a little bit more. And then that's where that progress comes in. And that's when you can start to really drive that step up. But it's that individual approach and taking into account those things rather than trying to fit someone into a system. It's like, how can we make the system fit them?
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a key point because if you're just trying to force something on somebody where it's not going to fit or anything like that, yeah, you just got to come up against more obstacles. I've got a guy that he works offshore, so for 2 weeks at the time that he's away, he doesn't have access to a full gym. The gym that he's got offshore, it's a lot better, but it's kind of like, look, we've got to try and create a system to allow him keeping that momentum going forward. From your experience, and I know you've mentioned quite a lot of qualities there, but is there we've touched on quite a lot about like the cardio side of things. I think like what we said earlier, the strength side of things that maybe becomes a lot more um, natural of going into the gym and lifting weights because you need to be strong. Is there a quality that you kind of see coming up all the time that players kind of struggle with? And the other side of that is, do you find that actually sometimes when those lifestyle factors are tuned in compared to training, that they actually progress a little bit more without kind of going too much into the training side of things, if that makes sense? I know there's kind of two parts to
Yep.
that.
No, that makes sense. So the first part of the question is there training qualities that people struggle with, and I think there's probably two big things that players struggle with, and I think the first one comes from the I was going to use the term disordered eating culture of the bodybuilding community, but it's the eating that helps them best fit their goal, but it's not the eating that best helps athletes hit athletic performance goals. So I think nutrition is that one fundamental pillar that is always missing, which leads to body comp being not ideal in the best way to put it. Like when I first started, like I said, I had a little bit of an eating problem, probably still do. That deep rooted front row's always stuck in with me. But since retiring, I've lost 37, maybe 40 kilos. And that's come from the fact that I always thought mass moves mass. And I think it's something that so many players hold on. But when you look at the average body fat percentage of the pros and you compare that to the average body fat percentage of the amateur athlete, there's about a 15 to 20% variance. And while Ellis Genge may be 115 kilos, he's probably sitting at roughly 20, 22% body fat. When I was sat at 115 kilos, I was 35% body fat. Makes such a difference. And then that leads to the second quality that people struggle with, speed and power. They know how to train, they can beast themselves with enough conditioning to get by. And if you play enough minutes, yes, you will get match fit. Are you going to be optimally fit? And are you going to have the best functioning energy system development and conditioning that you have? No. But most players can get away with turning up to training, beasting themselves Tuesday, Thursday, and playing enough minutes on a Saturday. But they're always going to be hindered by that body composition, and that body composition is always going to hinder speed and power. And if you compare sports like rugby to the speed and power scores of American football players, like there's a vast difference in that. And while, yes, they're a different sport, I think part of it then comes down to the fact that strength is over prioritized for the majority of people as the only quality that you need to train in rugby. But speed and power then gets neglected. So I think the nutrition solves a lot of that and just dropping body fat, optimizing your body composition and realizing that you don't need to be as heavy as you think. That tub of Ben and Jerry's every single night to put on weight is doing nothing for your performance. It may make you happy in the time. Like I love some cookie dough chunks myself, but doesn't really help that performance. So that's kind of I think I've answered the two questions there.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I got a little bit distracted there about the cookie dough ice cream. My mum used to work in a bakery, so I actually started off under 11s, under 12s as a winger, and then just worked my way forward into the scrum. So yeah, it's funny how kind of like and especially the coaches that I had that maybe played in like 70s, 80s, maybe like early 90s. And people, the players listening probably has the have the same thing of like it is that old schooler mentality. I actually remember one of my coaches at the time, obviously like quite skinny. I needed to put weight on. He was like, "Oh, you need to drink Guinness. It's full of iron. That'll help you help you bulk up." Whereas like at the time, it's one of them where I'm sure everyone's got a story about that. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love Guinness. I love Guinness now, but at the time, I'm like, what do I mean? I've got to do that. Or then, yeah, eating, you got to eat loads of red meat, do this. And I think there's a lot of these, I don't know if they're like folklore or like old school things are around to progress people like that. But when you're saying there about the difference in like body fat percentage and how it's performing, do you think that there is a shift now to amateur semi-pro players who are looking, and as well, the games changed in a little bit. You look at some of the rules change, it's going to speed it up a little bit. You look at compare that to like rugby league players, they're all kind of like the same body shape. They're trying to have a quicker, faster game. Do you think from your experience that there is a change where people are looking at it and being like, yes, I want to be an athlete. Yeah, I want to play my sport, but also, I want to feel good. I want to be able to, not just feel heavy and go through this cycle of beasting myself, all right, and then getting too knackered, beasting myself again, and going from there. Would you kind of agree with that?
Yeah, 100%. And I think I played front row, and I played front row at a decent standard for 6, 7 years. And every single off season, as soon as my last game would plays, I would drop 14, 15 kilos because I looked like porridge in a carrier bag. I hated how I looked whenever I played. I was out of shape, but that was what I thought was needed to do the job that I needed to do. Come the preseason, July to August, it would creep on. August, those preseason games would roll around, and I would probably be 8 to 9 kilos heavier than when I started preseason. And I would go through these vicious cut and bulk cycles because I always thought that mass moves mass. You can't then have this. And I think there's definitely a shift, and I'm not too sure whether it's my algorithm because obviously my algorithm is blessing me with a lot of educational content around this stuff. But I still think this shift is slow. There's definitely a new breed of players that are coming through that are like, yeah, I've seen the speed, I'm seeing the power. I want to be an athlete. I want to feel good. I want to look good. But then there's this old school player that's like, well, it's always worked for me. And then it's almost trying to, they're the ones that are getting to the end of their career that haven't hit the standards that they want. They're struggling to actually put the performances on the pitch that they want, but then they're so deep rooted in these old ways because that's the way that they've always done it. So I think as time goes on, there will be this shift, and I think it's coming soon, which is great because more and more players are getting exposed to the information that I didn't have growing up, watching YouTube, Instagram to progress. And I think that athletic side of things is becoming more and more prominent with some of the players coming through. Like they did a post, I think Bristol Bears, Ellis Genge and Lewis Rees Samet, and they compared like momentum scores. And that was something that, so many people saw, but actually opened their eyes to, oh, momentum. What is this? Well, momentum is the most important factor for winning collisions. And then that almost starts to prick the curiosity of some of the people listening. And it's like, yeah, it's good to see that shift is coming. And I think, as we mentioned earlier as well, seeing the pros train, you see the numbers that they put up. You see what that typical training looks like. You'll see England did a post where they did the speed and power testing with the CMJs. It's like, oh, okay. And yeah, I think this is quite an exciting trend. But then, as with anything, it can be taken the wrong way. And that's kind of the approach at the minute is that pick and mix approach. And I think as time goes on, it'll be a little bit more structure with this S&C stuff for the amateur player.
Yeah, this might be a little bit of a tangent, but yeah, I'm quite a big fan of a tangent. But we'll keep following this train of thought because on the topic of that, like you know, rugby was professional, 95, 96. In the grand scheme of things, it hasn't been going that long. And when you said there about, these old school players, I can't remember what the podcast clip that I saw, but it was John Dawes, the England hooker, and he was like he once found this book, which was like sports performance book from like the 80s and 90s, whatever, and it was to train every day, even on like a match day, and he did that for kind of like 2 years because no one gave him any direction. It was just a case of like, yeah, well, this is a book, so it must be true. Whereas you see how things, and you hear stories from the like early 2000s, and how things were structured and everything. Whereas you see the information and the science and how things are developing. It's a little bit like I can't remember what clip I saw, but it was Alad Walters, who was with South Africa, is with Ireland now, and their approach to it is like much more logical and thought out. I mentioned earlier about the lines uncut, and they're talking about the recovery and downtime and being able to go from there. Do you think it is just a case of it's taken probably more so at the top level, just that time for things to filter through from it from other sports? And because I'm sure, I think it was for England, they had somebody from like the Olympics come over and be like, well, have you thought about doing it this way? Do you think it was just a case of time for rugby maybe to catch up in terms of S&C compared to other sports?
And I think it's definitely the professionalization of the game makes opportunities more available for people coming through the ranks earlier on. And if you look at darts, for example, Luke Littler, who's one of the youngest champions ever, if not the youngest champion ever, he's got a 20, 30-year career ahead of him playing the sport. And I think the earlier exposure that you get to these things, and I have players that are 14, 15 now messaging me, oh, I've done this, I've done this, I've done this. And they're things that I would have totally never had the access to, but they've been doing it already for 2, 3 years. And that's 2, 3 years of development ahead of most people. And I think previously this was only available if you played professional, you were in an academy and you had this level of structure. But now that it's becoming more adopted by the masses, there's definitely going to be this shift. And if the amateur game gets better, it creates better professionals as a byproduct. And I think that's how we start to funnel the sport. And I think obviously Red Bull pumped so much money now into the sport of rugby. And I think the more money that comes in, the more opportunities once again. And I think this professionalization is going to keep happening. And as you said, if you compare the athletes that were in the 20 years ago in the sport of rugby and you compare them to the athletes now, they all probably run faster, hit harder, run for longer. They have higher levels of strength. And that's because they're exposed to it earlier on. And I think, that's only going to keep happening, which is always great for the sport because I think you want to see the best players play. And sometimes that comes through other people walking the walk before them that pass the lessons on, that then allow those people to get to where they were faster and push on and rinse and repeat that process. And it's the whole All Blacks mantra of leave the jersey in a better place than when you first found it. And that's kind of S&C, that's kind of development. That's kind of the sport of rugby. You want other players to walk the path to set the standard for the new people coming through. And I think Bath did a post of the prop that they got coming through, benching 180 kilos at like 19. And I'm like, doesn't make him a stud, but makes him a very, very good athlete. And we know that good athletes make great players.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Because I think as well, at least, I think you said right at the start, in terms of genetics, and like there are some players out there that are just kind of, they were always going to be at that, always going to be at that top level. Whereas, those 14, 15-year-olds, they have something to aim for. Whereas like they can start it there, and yeah, they might not have the genetics, straight away, but they can put that work in and maybe be at a different level to what they would have been if that wasn't. if that wasn't there. Kind of as we've kind of gone through that in terms of training, nutrition, the the end product is obviously the performance on the pitch. That's what everyone's kind of like. I'm doing all of this. This is what I need to do. And sometimes it's a case of touching back on social media, and kind of like just maybe the time that we live in right now. I want it right now. If I'm doing this, I want to be faster right now. I want it right now. What's kind of your or people might be thinking that it's like, all right, well, how long do I have to do this for? Do I need to do an 8 week preseason and then I'm going to be good to go? Do I need to maintain that during season? Do I need to is it a case of it's going to be like instantly happen as soon as I start doing this? What's kind of like, when do the fruits of the labor kind of show on performance? Because if you've have that mindset of, right, I've done a pre-season, I'm going to have that first game, I'm going to be the strongest, most powerful, I'm going to be breaking through tackles. How does that kind of work? What's the time frame? What's the structure? How do you get these the results that you've mentioned before of, this is what's happened with X player, this is a similar situation to you, this is how it's going to work. What's kind of your approach? How do you kind of apply that?
So I think it's a great question because we want everything, we want it now. That's the nature of the human brain. We want to get there as fast as possible. And I think strength conditioning is a process that you can definitely speed up results, but it's a fine line between overcooking and doing a little bit more. And I think that line is often flirted by people because most people overestimate how much they can get done in the space of a week and a month. They all underestimate how much they can get done over months and years. And the first thing that we will always outline to players is the 3x3 framework. So I've stolen this from Gary Strength and Dane Miller because I think it was a phenomenal way to just highlight and manage expectations of the athlete. And it essentially works that the first step that we want people to hit is 3 hours a week for 3 weeks. If you can do that, that's like level one. Then the next step is we want you to be able to hit 3 hours a week for 3 months. Then we want you to hit 3 hours a week for all three parts of the season: in season, off season, pre-season. Then we want you to hit 3 hours a week for 3 years. And I think we've got sufficient data of people coming through the program that if they can dedicate a minimum of 3 sessions a week for 3 years, we've taken someone from the level one standards that we've set out to the level five. And I think that right there then gives such a powerful expectation management from the off that they can really do this thing if they can commit all other aspects of their life to being able to do that to a well standard.
Yeah, I think that's I've read that model, and I think it's there's a lot of people always think that complexity is going to be the thing that's going to, oh, so I need to be doing this or like morning, evening, or anything like that. Whereas, doing it over time and something that is repeatable is ultimately what's going to lead to success. Rather than thinking, oh, well, I need to swap and change this, and it's like, no, this is the structure that we're working towards, and it shows from the players, athletes that you're working with to get those results from there. Um, Quite a lot of topics and tangents spoken about there, Joel, but really, really enjoyed everything that we've spoken about today. But the last question that I like to ask for everyone listening, what would be your take-home points or words of wisdom from what we've spoken about today?
So I think the biggest lesson that if I could impart to anyone, and I'll take this from the lens of they were in the same position that I was with a big goal of stepping up and they want to really try and maximize it, is that last one where you are probably setting some realistic goals and some hefty goals. You want to kick on, you've set these big numbers, and they're not wrong goals. You're probably just setting the wrong time horizon. You're trying to get there faster than you can. And that's leading to you doing methods that are unsustainable, that you feel like you need to be doing because you have such a time crunch to get there. But if you just extend the time horizon on those goals, rather than thinking in training programs, think about training cycles and how you can build out longer periods of training. Then you're able to get to a position where you can start to stack those wins more consistently. And if you can do that consistently enough, it may not seem like it 3 weeks from now, may not seem like it 3 months from now, but 3 years, you will look back at yourself and thank yourself for the boring work that you put in, because that's the stuff that actually matters. Stop majoring in the minors, just focus on the big rocks of training, nutrition, recovery, getting a structured program in, eating to match those performance goals, and structuring your week in a way that allows you to consistently do that. And then 3 years, you'll look back, you'll have a conversation with yourself in that moment and go, fuck, I've achieved more than I ever thought. And that's kind of the powerful take home that I think so many players miss. And we've seen that light bulb go off. I'll be celebrating one of the guys' 3rd year on the program. And like when he first started, I always like to say the messages that I sent them week one, they laugh back and go, "You're such a liar." I'm like, "Yeah, but we caught you bought in. We got you bought into it," because they're like, "Yeah, your technique's great there," or "Oh, yeah, you're doing really well." And then 3 years later, they're 120 kilos up on their squat. They're moving really well. They're playing 3 standards higher, and they go, "Oh, we got there in the end." And I think that's the take home. You give something enough time, dedicate enough effort to it, and do that consistently, you'll get the results that you want.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a big fan of focusing on the big rocks as well, and that phrase, majoring in the minors. As soon as I heard that, it's like, yeah, trying to think about, oh, this I need to do this little thing or that little thing, and it's kind of like, really, you're kind of concentrating on things that you're missing that bigger picture. Thanks a lot, Joe, for taking the time to jump on. Like I say, really enjoyed chatting with you. I thought there was loads of great information in there. For everyone listening who might have any questions about what we've spoken about today, want to reach out, see the content and information that you share, or get in touch with you, where can people find you or reach out to you?
So Instagram is probably the best place to get in contact with me. That's Instagram.com, joelharries.strengthsolution. And YouTube will be another place where you can start to explore some of the concepts and the topics. So if you like speed, strength, power conditioning, we've probably got something there for that. That's youtube.com/, the strength solution. And yeah, they're the best places, but I'm always happy to chat, run through some stuff, and essentially help as many players as possible start to step up and hit their goals. So that's where you can find me. And mate, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
No problem at all. Thank you very much. Thanks to everyone listening, and I will catch you all at the next episode.